Restless saint? I don't blame you. It's not every day our home is dressed in silence. I'm Eddie Webb.
And I am Chris Spivey.
And today we're going to talk about Tomb of Dracula, issue 11, The Voodoo Man. I'm actually surprised we held off for an entire episode before doing an accent. So,
Well, all right. So I will let it be known that I actually started reading these when I was on vacation, and I've read the first two, and I remembered how much I'm going to come in hot. I dislike this issue, so I waited so I could do something funny to make myself enjoy it more.
yes. This is an issue that exists. we're gonna get through it.
So I guess this is also where we go back to the fact that Dracula is the protagonist, and it feels very much like Drac is protagonist versus last issue where it felt like Blade was the actual protagonist.
Right, and this is, it's a good example of the weirdness we talked about last issue because there's times where different chunks of supporting cast just disappear for an issue or two because we're following Dracula, we're not following them, and so it can at times feel disjointed because even though Dracula is the protagonist, he's still written like a villain. So there, it's almost kind of like a anthology series in some ways, in the sense that it's just different stories that happen to also all feature Dracula. But then this is around the point after this is where some of the continuity starts to kick in, and then after this, it gets a little more actually serialized. But prior to this, it felt more like the introduction of Blade was like, here's a random vampire hunter. His name is Blade. They have a fight.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I like that. So I'm glad that I've actually never read these before because now it's fun sort of going back to them, and it makes me try to remember how was Doctor Doom written in the 70s.
Right.
If Doom is because there are many. I love talking about Doctor Doom. There are many iterations of Doctor Doom. Some of them are really good. Some of them are really bad. And I'm trying to remember if the 70s also sort of wrote and slotted Doom in a similar fashion as how Dracula is here.
Kind of. Around this time, they had a relatively short-lived comic called Marvel Supervillains, which was kind of like Marvel 2-in-1 or Marvel Team Up, where it was Doom plus another villain, and then they would have an issue. So Doom was the protagonist of that because he was the villain that often got paired with somebody else, although I think there was like one or two where he wasn't in it. And he was at this point also becoming more of the Marvel villain rather than specifically Fantastic Four villain. So I had some good issues like one with Submariner, because Submariner used to be a villain, and so they kind of dig into that a little bit.
I'm sorry, Eddie. Who?
It's not relevant to the conversation. I'm not going to go into it. So just
no, Eddie. Who is Submariner?
No, put it back in the box. We're not talking about Submariner today.
All right. If we don't talk about Submariner, can we possibly talk about Imperius Rex?
We have talked about Submariner in the past. I'm not falling for your trap. But suffice to say, so yes, Doom did kind of sort of have his own series, but it was really just kind of heist of the week type stuff.
Okay.
It wasn't. This is a little closer to what we would expect in a villain-led series now, and Dr. Doom did eventually have his own series much later. In fact, he even had Infamous Iron Man was a Dr. Doom series.
I've literally never heard of this Marvel villain series you're telling me about right now.
Oh, really?
I'm going to go find it. Never. I knew the Marvel team up with Spider-Man plus another hero or hero team. Because if I remember right, for the Marvel team up with Spider-Man, the last one was like Spider-Man plus the X-Men, Rogue, and some other people. So now I'm going to go find this Marvel villains thing.
And 2-in-1 is basically the same thing, but with a thing instead of Spider-Man. Because in the 70s, the thing was basically the equivalent of Wolverine, where he was in fucking everything.
Because who wouldn't want to hang? I'd rather hang out with the Thing than Wolverine, hands down.
I wish that trend had continued, honestly.
Because not only would he, Not only would he a great drinking buddy, he would game with you because he played card games. I'm sure now he'd be playing TTRPGs. So hands down, Ben Grimm, 9 out of 10 times.
Right. And he's got kids now, so who knows what kind of games he plays.
But then my question for you is: would you have rather have teamed up with the Thing or Spider-Man if you had to be in one of those as a hero?
Oh, the Thing, absolutely.
Why?
Because I don't want to be anywhere near Peter Parker's luck.
True, that was the 70s. That was like the height of his bad luck.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Whereas
Even
the
without Black
Thing,
Cat
like
around.
the Thing, and the Thing was also completely out of his "I'm going to mope because I'm a monster" phase. He was just like, I'm just a guy from Brooklyn who occasionally gets caught up in bizarre shit. And frankly, that's his most fun. Like, there's a pretty strong run of 2-in-1 where he becomes the head of security for a superhero project. Um, and so he just like, I'm the guy in charge of security for this testing group. And it's just all the weird shit that happens as a result of that. It's He meets himself in issue 50. I mean, but
Okay,
anyway.
now, before you go back to this issue, since I show you how much I want to talk about it, I want to now make my own new Defenders team. Since Defenders are 4 members that are composed of, these are all the 70s versions of them: The Thing,
Mhm.
Beast, Wonder Man, and I can't figure out the fourth one, because if you've read them, Beast and Wonder Man back then, they had the very much comic vibe where they banter back and forth with their buddies.
Mhm.
And I think the Thing would slot nicely with that. I don't know who the fourth member would be. I'm gonna have to think about that.
Are we talking about 70 characters specifically?
Yes, there's 70s iteration of them because that's where the Thing was in that fun loving mode, and I built my
Right.
entire idea suddenly around that.
Right. Because my first gut would be Doctor Strange because you need a straight man in that group somewhere.
True, and
Um,
the real
but
Defenders
he's
are always
arguably like
Strange's team.
right. Well, except for the very large chunk where he wasn't. But yes, Strange is bookend the team. But also Beast was in the Defenders too, so there's that.
But was the Beast
But he
Defenders
was in
the
the '80s
70s or
Defenders.
80s?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was in the
so I
'80s. The
thought.
new Defenders.
This is so sad that we're
All
sitting
right.
here discussing this like actual facts and we know it so well. And I don't think I've read those in 20 years.
In my mild defense, I've actually read the Defenders about 5 years ago, so it's a little more fresh in my memory. But yes.
So what you're saying is I have a near perfect memory and I'm practically perfect everywhere. Okay, we can go with Dracula
You have a perfect memory for stupid shit, yes. But then again,
now.
don't we
I
all?
left off the caveat purposely.
Right. So the cover, again, has like a million word balloons, but it is some bikers going away from the undead, and it has the amazing phrase of "Don't let this place give you the creeps, baby. I tell you, there's no such thing as vampires," which on a magazine called Tomb of Dracula pretty much tells you how that's going to go for him.
Okay,
Uh,
Eddie, how petty can Dracula be? Like, this is just a petty issue completely throughout.
Oh no, it is completely petty. Actually, before we go into, I forgot to mention this was released May 22nd, 1973. Written by Marv Wolfman, penciled by Gene Colan, inked by Jack Abel, colored by Petra Goldberg, lettered by Tom Orzechowski, and edited by Roy Thomas. So, um, Marv, Gene, and Roy are kind of the constants in this, but we're going to see that inking, coloring, and lettering changed pretty heavily through this. There wasn't actually a completely consistent team on this book. The closest it got was Marv and Gene, and with Roy Thomas editing. But anyway, yes, Dracula is extremely petty. This spoilers. This entire issue is because of one panel that happens 2 issues ago
And
that we didn't cover.
part of me as a writer understands that if you're going to be taking over and writing an entire series by yourself, you need as many little plot threads as you can get to keep that going.
Right.
I don't know if I would have started with this though.
So, again, one thing to kind of keep in mind as we talk about this is that this is it just become a monthly book. I lasted book was bi-monthly throughout this, but I went back and double checked the dates. Actually, it has just become a monthly book. So I think the pacing when you have 2 months in between, you kind of want to keep it relatively tight because people have kind of forgotten over the past 2 months. You want to make sure that they're strong threads to follow. So this kind of has the feel of a fill-in issue, even though it is the core team, creative team working on it still. And fill-in issues are notorious for taking some tiny bit of continuity that no one cared about and trying to expand it out to an entire issue. So Dracula is flying through the air, like literally just arms out as a dude, cape flying through the air. And he's making his way to a town in Surrey. Because again, we're still in England. He's trying to make his way back to his coffin. And there's a note here where he's talks about abandoning his notion of seeking mortality. And it's a note to Dracula Lives. I mentioned before, Dracula Lives was the black and white magazine that Marvel was separately doing. That was a little more kind of adult oriented. And that's where a lot of the actual character development of Dracula ended up going into. If you have the Tomb of Dracula,
have you read any of
collection,
those?
which is one, huh?
Have you read any of those Dracula Lives?
I have a little bit. I was actually about to mention, if you have the complete collection, volume 1, like I do, it does actually have like the first 3 or 4 issues in the back of the volume of Dracula Lives, and they're okay. It suffers from what I call Torchwood syndrome, in the sense of when people who have been writing for a younger audience are told they can write for adults now, what constitutes adult gets a little skewed. So it's boobs and violence, so it is what it is. But it does have a story where they're trying to talk Dracula into, here's a chance you could become a human again. And he's like, no, I just prefer being a monster, after he struggles with it a bit. So, because of course, him being Dracula, a vampire, is a cool thing. So anyway, so he goes to sleep in his coffin. He briefly forgets that he murdered Graves because
I wouldn't say that he murdered Graves. I would say Graves died by circumstance. Circumstance of working for Dracula.
knowingly and willingly abandoned Graves to a boat that he set up to explode.
Okay, we've seen that Dracula primarily, if we ignore this opening shot, flies by turning to mist or back. Yes. How could he have carried Graves while flying?
The point is that he could have told Graves, hey, the explosives are going off. Get out of the boat before it explodes. In one of the many escape craft that are on the boat.
It's like I tell my daughter whenever we're watching a show, don't ever work for a villain. Don't ever work for the villain, because that's what happens to you if you're a hitch person.
Can we negotiate down to manslaughter?
No! All right. Dracula did not kill Graves. Dracula created a situation where Graves may have perished, which is what occurred.
I will say it is amusing that, obviously the point of this is to recap what happened in previous issues, right? Because one thing Marvel did at this time was they had to write each issue as if this was someone's first, so they had to kind of recap whatever is relevant. But it's hilarious because, like, oh, how could I possibly forget this idiot who got himself blown up? And then it's like, oh, it's just as well because he prevented me from trying to accomplish something, which sets up an interesting dynamic in that Dracula is really good at blaming other people for his own mistakes that you'll see in future issues.
But isn't that a general villain move, though?
And totally. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And then we go into the other recap, which is relevant to this issue. That in previous issues, he was weak with blood loss. The vampire hunters had drained blood out of him as part of a complicated plot that's not worth getting into. But when he was wandering the streets of London by himself, trying to recover from that, he was attacked and mugged by a biker gang. And he's still mad about that shit. He
this
is more
this is
mad.
the
He is more
American
mad about being mugged by bikers than he is about losing his henchman in an exploding boat.
or fighting Blade.
Right. Blade's not mentioned anywhere in this. It's the how he remembers the past couple of issues has been, so I had a plan, blah blah blah. My minion fucked it up, the boat exploded. But seriously, those bikers, I really want to kill them. Not the guy with the wooden knives who kicked my ass. No, those assholes who mugged me. I'm gonna, tomorrow. I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna get them.
So the lack of serialization is also striking me. Not only the lack of mention of Blade, but also the vampires that Dracula had made that Blade killed, because there was an inference that there were more of them,
Yep, and he
and they
just
aren't
didn't
brought
reveal.
up at all either.
Right, right, because what's kind of happening here is, again, these are all written as if this is someone's first issue, so anything that's not relevant to this specific story is conveniently forgotten, which does lead to, again, Dracula having very selective recall, but it does add to, again, it's starting to build an interesting character and a character you can follow because it's like, wait, how can this guy just not remember this stuff? Or how can this guy be so angry about this? So you're kind of like, what is up with this guy? And it kind of gets you to follow along a bit more.
If you had, before you move on, because I can tell you have that move on face, if you had to cast this Dracula, what actor would you choose to play this version of Dracula?
Burt Reynolds.
Wow, that was quick. Like,
He looks
Why
like Burt
Burt
Reynolds.
Reynolds?
Well, I mean, because I think Burt Reynolds' accent aside, I don't think he can do the accent. But I think Burt Reynolds could do that kind of strong charisma that you are drawn to despite the stuff he's doing. And because Burt Reynolds is so known for not playing villains, I think that villainous turn would make people want to like him even though he's doing horrible things on screen, which is something that'll be important to follow this Dracula.
Oh, I love that. Awesome. Okay. So I guess we'll move back to the issue where I do love the panel where Dracula's in the coffin and we get his dream or remembrance of that biker game, like foot stomping the ever living crap out of him.
Yeah. Um,
Beautiful.
and also, one thing that Colin does that I like is that we're not quite to the era where comic book panels can be off the grid. That it's starting to happen a little bit in Doctor Strange at this point in time, but still, most of the comics are still on some kind of grid. But inside the panels, Colin, we talked before about how the Dracula changing from bat to man, Colin blurred that, and it's kind of hard. Um, it looked like it was all happening at once, even though just by following the logic of a panel, you can see that it's supposed to be a transformation. This is the same thing. It's like these people are not actually stomping onto Dracula's coffin, but because of the way it's laid out and the way it's colored and the way the writing is, you're not lost in what's actually happening here. So Coleman does a really good job of making the intangible and the physical exist on the same page, which is really, really great for a comic like this.
Mm-hmm. Why would Dracula need to have his name on a gold plaque on his coffin?
Well, you yourself said there were lots of other vampires floating around, so he needs to know which one's his.
I
Using your own
totally
evidence
disagree
against
with
you.
that. But I will let that go because I do not have a good comeback.
Right. Okay, so we get to uh, Jason Faust, and
Ugh.
all right. So,
Eddie,
um,
Eddie, who is Faust in literature?
oh, in literature, yeah, because we're definitely in the land of extremely on the nose name references. Um, Faust was a character who, in the titular opera, um, tried to make a deal with Satan and thought he had succeeded, only to realize that Satan had actually ensnared him, and Faust was damned to hell. And so Faust has become a byword, a metaphor for people who make bad deals and get hoisted by their own petard, or in modern parlance, they fucked around and then they found out. Uh,
One of my
so this
favorite
is
sayings.
Jason Faust, who is in an iron lung, which was a device. Although there are still like 10 operative today, and there's actually been since COVID some interest in possibly making more of them. But basically, the idea is that a person is vacuum sealed more or less into this mechanical device, and then the pressure inside the iron lung forces them to breathe. So basically, it's a way to kind of encourage breathing in someone who otherwise has trouble breathing. But they're basically locked inside of this steel tube, and it is heavily overused as a device for villains who are impotent, and so they have to find other ways to try to assert their masculinity, even though they're trapped in this device that keeps them alive. It's ableist as fuck. It is one of the
Yes.
many isms we're going to explore in this. This page actually has two different isms on it. um, but it turns out that Faust is working with the leader of the hoodlums, whose name is Brand, which, just for reference, did not actually appear in issue 9. So this is completely new. And he
Do
works
you
with this.
think that he has a cousin whose first name happens to be Boston?
Or maybe Russell.
So if anyone's curious, that is a DC joke, but I'm not sure if anyone else will get it.
Uh, um, and so basically, uh, Faust wants revenge on the men who hurt him so much that they put him into the iron lung. While this is happening, there are two little kind of mechanical arms, one which has a needle, one which has a figure written onto it. And given the title of Voodoo Man, you can immediately see where this is going, and it's nowhere good. Which then means Faust also knows voodoo.
a, a, a
Yes.
less offensive point. How did he make that large needle that would fit that massive claw-like hand and what looks more like a gold figurine?
I mean, the only thing I will say is the gold figurine is, I assume that is creative coloring, because throughout all of this, Goldberg she's been coloring certain elements of this to be more evocative than accurate. That's a pretty common
Yeah.
technique. But as for the rest, like the extremely badly designed parquet floor, I assume that Brand has just hired people to do stuff, and they tell him, "Oh yeah, it's done," but he can't see, so he's like, "Sure, I guess it's okay." So he has no idea that he has
Okay.
this giant needle.
I was curious, logistically speaking, because if I
He's
don't
rich.
like something or if I get bored, I start breaking down things that don't make sense instead of going with the flow of something. And this is where I hit that flow point right here. I reread this page, the next 2 pages, 4 times because I got so bored. I wanted to do something else.
Yes. Um. Next page talks a little bit about Lucas Brand, who's the head of this gang of hoodlums. Has been arrested 11 times, convicted 9 times, served 12 years and some change behind bars.
Did you add
And
up? Did you add up what age he was when he effectively went to jail based on this little story? It was like he went to jail around 12 or 13, I think, or
yeah,
something obscene.
Dracula did say that it was a gang of juveniles earlier on. He is the 27-year-old head of a bunch of teenagers, which is also deeply weird.
Yeah.
Immediately after getting out of jail, he goes back to crime,
Which we could. I won't put a modern recidivism rate on that, but that is not a surprising statistic because once people have been in jail, it becomes harder to find any other sort of employment if they want to. This character that we're discussing does not. But if you want a more realistic approach, part of it is once someone gets out of jail, there's a system in place that pretty much stops them from getting other sort of meaningful employment or work. And they frequently fall back into old patterns that puts them back into prison.
absolutely. That is not this guy. This guy loves being generic henchman asshole.
Yeah, evil for the sake of being evil because evil is fun.
And they display their hooliganism by nearly running people off the road and splashing two people on the street who happen to be Frank Drake and Rachel Van Helsing. And enjoy those 4 panels because that's pretty much all you're going to see of them in this issue.
So, who are these 2 people, Eddie?
No, we met them last issue.
No, we did
no,
not meet Frank Drake last issue.
No,
and I don't think we met Rachel either.
Problem is, I've read all of these, so I forgot we didn't cover that. So you're right. Okay, so Frank Drake is the great-great-grandson of Dracula himself. His family were descended from the Draculas. They came to the U.S. and they changed the last name to Drake. He inherited Dracula's castle back in issue 1. He was friends with Graves, who was the guy who served Dracula. And so that's how all this kicked off, is because it was Graves that resurrected Dracula from the castle, but it was Frank that inherited it. Frank then started to actually want to hunt down Dracula. He ran into Rachel Van Helsing, who is the granddaughter of the original Van Helsing who hunted Dracula. And since then, they have been working together as a team, and very heavily implied they're going to become love interests, but they're still just friends at this point in time. And so they're based in London trying to hunt down Dracula. But fact is, you're right, we didn't see them last issue. We're barely going to see them this issue, but they're ostensibly the quote main characters, which reinforces they're not the main character. Dracula's the main character.
Since you're speaking about Dracula's family and his lineage and everything else, I'm curious. Did you know that Dracula was in fact an impaler who should have been a sailor but could have been a tailor? Do you not remember this key song from our youth?
I didn't remember the song. No.
Oh, come on, man! All right. So I'm enjoying my banter because I made it. But if anyone hasn't heard that song, I suggest Google it. It is a banger from when at least I was young.
Yes. So now I will point out that Frank Drake and Rachel's a pretty decent vampire hunter, but neither of them are good investigators. Because their plan is, we have found out there is a play about Dracula that is wrapping up in London. So we're going to go to the play to see who is portraying Dracula, to see if he knows anything about Dracula.
You say that. We've established that Dracula is a petty bitch with egotistical issues and problems. I would not be surprised if Dracula showed up to see if how they're presenting him was good or not, and then took action.
Okay, that's actually fair. I'll actually concede that point. In previous issues, they've also not had great track record in actually finding Dracula. So,
well, I'm not saying that they're necessarily good investigators. I'm saying they had a good idea this one time in this singular instance.
But then it mentions that we'll talk about that another time, which is implied in a future issue. So that's a subplot but this is where the serialization starts to kick in. Here's a little thread that we'll pick up later. That's where it actually does start properly happening. But it's very minor. Like, you could drop those 4 panels and lost almost nothing of the story. So the hoodlums are going to basically a trust, because Faust tried to cash in some bonds before they were due, and they're trying to push him into doing that because Faust needs the money now. And we find out that the little golden voodoo doll that Faust has is in fact of this bank manager, Oliver Gordon. And so they start to stab making Gordon start to keel over and feel pain, while the hoodlum badgers him into basically forcing him to try to give over the money. And
now,
oh yeah,
how can Faust afford to pay all these people to do things if he needs some money that he has not been able to get, which is one of the reasons that led him to be in the Iron Lung?
IOUs.
Mm-hmm. If you were said hoodlum who spent most of your life in jail with a band of teenagers who willingly follow you around and you need money to buy booze and smokes for them, would you accept an IOU?
If the plot required me to, yes. That's
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, no, this is definitely something that if you think about it too hard, it starts to fall apart. Um, Also, even worse is that Gordon's like, I have a hidden camera that's been filming all of this, which doesn't sound that bad, but to it's the 70s, and so behind the curtain is literally like a massive stand-up movie camera with 3 lenses on it that's just hang out behind a curtain.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much because it's so bad. And the fact that he pointed out to them specifically.
Right. And so shockingly, the villains decide to do away with this guy and then smash the camera that he conveniently pointed out to them. And then threatened to take to Scotland Yard. So we then have we're back to Dracula floating around, and an instance of my favorite meme is that whenever a non-British person does a comic about London, inevitably, no matter where you are in London, you can see the clock Big Ben, because that is apparently the only thing that exists in London. So of course, wherever you are, you're going to see Big Ben.
I believe that. I've watched enough TV shows to know that's true.
Yeah, I mean, even though I live literally about 100 some miles away from Big Ben, because I live in London, therefore I can still see it out my window.
Of course, it's like the bat signal. You see it everywhere.
Right, exactly. So a woman is about to be straight up fucking stabbed by a mugger.
That's a nice knife, though.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
like an
nice knife.
old school knife.
I do like everyone's wearing Sherlock Holmes coats in this because it's London in the 70s. So that's obviously how everyone dresses.
Are you saying that's not how you all dress now? I'm
No,
literally, I'm literally staring at you in a Sherlock Holmes coat, and for some reason a deerstalker, and I don't know why because we're
the
recording.
deerstalker is behind me on the shelf. I'm not wearing it right now. But I do love that. So Dracula changes from a bat to a man to attack the guy, and takes them time to narrate what happens. It says, "Watch as my form again changes as my hands turn to Callan claws." It's just he's so fucking extra. I love it. So he drinks the prowler's blood, and then poof, but it was X off again.
Oh, I love what we do in the shadows.
Right. And so we're back to Faust, where he explains how he learned voodoo. So he was a businessman in Haiti, and so he found himself lost, and he was approached by natives. They dragged him to their chieftain, claimed they were on sacred grounds, and so he punished them by tortured them with voodoo dolls for 3 months, because that's totally how that works. But that is the reason why he is in an iron lung, is because his legs and arms and his nervous system are all immobilized, but he can actually die. So the government found him and brought him to the hospital. And so during that time, he was able to learn voodoo because he was tortured for 3 months by voodoo. And I just, there's so much that's wrong with this backstory.
I will give these panels one compliment, though.
Which is
that throughout they have Faust in green, which is definitely considered a villain color.
You're really grasping.
Hey, Hey, I'm doing what I can, buddy. Doing what I can.
Right. So he has a whole medical bag full of conveniently made voodoo dolls, um, which are all yellow. Uh, uh, and he happens to have one for one of the other people that he's going after. Meanwhile, more interestingly, Dracula's in a disco. And we have people that are actually not dressed like Sherlock Holmes. So that brief moment has passed.
Because much
Uh,
like in The Prisoner, Eddie, this is a disenfranchised hippie youth. They would not dress in the stereotypical Holmesian garb.
right, they dress in stereotypical hippie garb.
Yep.
So, sunglasses and jumpers and short skirts. Uh, and Dracula just no sells the whole experience. He's still opera cape the whole 9 yards. Um, grabs one of the because this is where the bikers are hanging out. So he just literally just goes to where the biker kids are hanging out, grabs one of them, and then the guy says, "Oh," naturally goes, "Who are you?" And Dracula's like, "Now you committed 2 wrongs against me. One, you attacked me, and second is you don't recognize me." And I completely believe that those are completely equivalent in Dracula's head. Don't you know who I am? And of course, Doctor Doom fashion speaks in the third person. Dracula does not joke; rather, he wants information.
Oh,
There's a great use of insolent youth or insolent fool. Sorry, but basically interrogates this guy to try to find out where the rest of the gang are. And then he turns into a bat, and then the youth is like, "Oh my god, it can't be!" And then the Dracula.
you're overlooking something. We have Dracula with a moment of humanity. They're right here because the dude is like, I am no longer with them. Brain want to do bad shit. I want it out. And Dracula says, "You live because I believe you." Doesn't kill him.
Right, but I mean, and that's one of the things that it's a good shout because one of the things that I like about this series is that it is generally unclear if Dracula is trying to be humane or if he's just if this is just more inconvenient for him, right? Um, I forget. Oh yeah, it was Doctor Who, the Ninth Doctor. When they had the
Mm-hmm.
whole episode of the Slovene where like you let one go and that makes you feel good, and this kind of reminds me of that.
Yep, absolutely. It's exactly what I was thinking.
Um, but also, uh, he when he says that like it's the I believe you and it's lucky for you, but uh, uh, you would not remain long enough if I didn't, alive long enough if I didn't. So he still has to leave on a threat. Which so it's not the he's tortured humanity. It's more of the okay, you're not worth it to me, so I'll let you go. Which is interesting. It's not the kind of '90s vampires angsting over their humanity. This is very much Dracula's like, okay. Again, it's a bit Doctor Doomish. Doctor Doom occasionally has benevolent moments, which he explains to himself and
But
justifies.
the implied threat is why I saw it as even being more human than not.
Right. Oh,
Because
okay.
that's what a lot of humans would do if you hurt them and they decided not to kill you or hurt you back. There's an implied threat that I could have done this, and if you fuck around, you'll definitely find out.
That's true. That's true. I can see that. Yeah.
I wasn't taking it from the more like stereotypical, almost gothic angst perspective of it.
Mhm. No, I can see that. Is the for as alien as he thinks himself, his reactions are quite human. That front I actually can see that. So he flies as a bat all the way to the cliffs of Dover. Um,
How many blood points is
and
he spending to constantly transform like this? Because I mean, like it's
I mean, he did feed on 2 people in this issue so far, so he is replenishing pretty quickly.
two.
Didn't he feed on someone at the very beginning of the issue?
I don't think so. I know he spent on the
Uh,
mugger, Stabby McStabberson,
oh no, you're right. No, he went right he went right to sleep. He's fed on
and he
one
didn't
person.
feed on the woman because they would have shown that.
Right, right. No, you're right. You only fed the mugger. Um, He goes back to look up the door, right? Changes back to man, and he realizes they're not mere criminals or something sinister going on because he finds a dead body and there are no signs of a struggle. So uh, the gang Brands is going to collect their money from. They're going to the sixth victim, so they can then get the payoff from Faust. And the sixth victim is Quincy Harker. So Quincy Harker is another of the supporting cast. He is again, I think he's the son of the Harkers from the novels. Novel, sorry, singular. He is an elderly man. He is disabled, and he has a cubic fuck ton of shit built into his wheelchair. As far as everyone else knows, it's just an electric wheelchair. It's what they call self-driving. But now we call it just electric wheelchair, so it drives itself. But in a previous issue, it did have holes that popped out. It could shoot stakes out of the side of the wheelchair. And so one of the dilemmas of the cast is that the Van Helsings feel very strongly in traditional vampire hunting techniques, and Blades, to a degree, sides with that ethos. Whereas the Harker, Quincy specifically, but him and his cadre, feel that advanced technology is the way to go. And so that's kind of the conflict we have. And I think we saw some of that conflict in last issue too.
Mm-hmm.
So Harker, it turns out, is I'm trying to remember actually why they're coming after him. It's been a minute since I reread this. Well, anyway, they're going after Harker, and he's by himself. We saw Rachel and Frank are out. His daughter Edith is at her friends.
He's
Someone
not
comes.
quite by himself. You
His
forgot
dog is
the vicious attack dog.
the vicious attack dog. Yes, lasts for one panel.
These are hoodlums that can take down Dracula. That dog lasted a whole panel. That is kudos.
Or Cujo's. Turns out actually he hates dogs. Or one of the members of the gang hates dogs. But two gang members cover the dog in a blanket and pin him down, whereas Brands grabs Harker around the neck and makes him call the dog off. The dog's name is Saint. And so basically, he's like, I'm going to tell you about Jason Faust. And it turns out Faust is a friend. Okay, this is it. So it was Harker's advice that Faust relocate his business to Haiti. And so that is why he's going after Harker, because Harker, the vampire hunter, also on the side does some business consulting and told him to move to Haiti.
How else can he afford to put all those incredible gadgets in that kick-ass wheelchair?
Right. You need to reduce the cost of the stuff.
Well, also, if we think about it in the 70s, that would, even without the cool gadgets, that was a pretty advanced wheelchair.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It is a very, very, for the 70s, very advanced. So Dracula busts in because this is he was following them in bat form and staring through the window. But he seeks revenge, and so Dracula is temporarily on the side of Quincy because, yes, Quincy is his enemy, but these assholes kicked me in the street. So he sought these miscreants for nights. It just narrates the whole time he's whooping their asses. It's like, it will stop me. You killed me, but I'm already dead and reborn once more. And of course, one of them's like, you murdered Rafe. And he's like, I have not killed any of these scum. That would be too easy. I've done something more. And now it turns out they're all under his power. And so basically, forces them to go back to their bikes, drive as fast as possible on the cliffs of Dover, and then drive off. So he hypnotizes them into killing themselves. And then tells Harker he's not going to kill him today because he can't afford the humanity loss. No, actually, what he says is that his lust, for tonight's Dracula's lust has been filled, which by extrapolation, we're assuming lust for revenge, but without that context, does seem like he was thinking about fucking Harker and decided against it.
Okay, if Dracula can mass dominate people, which he just did this whole room, why is this a book series?
Right. I mean, well, because again, Dracula's powers are whatever the plot demands. And now he does need them to stare into his eyes. That again, very common tropes. Look into my eyes. So it's not just I'm in the same room as you. I can do this. And he did beat the crap out of them, and so they're terrified and staring at him because he beat the crap out of them. And then now he's got the eye contact, and he can mesmerize them. But yes, it is his power set is purely just what the plot demands.
And now this one I will give you. This is definitely vampicide that happens here. Now I will give you Graves. Graves died under not Dracula's fault. Well, let me rephrase that. He died under Dracula's fault, but Dracula did not kill him or directly in his existence.
So mesmerizing them and forcing them to drive off a cliff is murder, but mesmerizing someone and forcing them to put explosives on a boat and then leaving the boat when it explodes is not murder.
Correct. Because it was not Dracula that set those explosives. Dracula here mesmerized them. I could even make that argument not work because technically it would be the bikes that killed them when they went over the side. I could do a whole shtick here, but I will not let it go. I'm just leaving it there.
Dracula, the vampire defense lawyer.
Yes, I wouldn't work, but once again, I wouldn't work for the villain because I know better.
So it turns out that he left Brand unmesmerized. And Brand tries to get a hot iron out of the fire to attack Dracula with, and Dracula's like, "Of course, I didn't forget you. I've saved you for a special death." So he mesmerizes him. He mesmerizes Brand as well, and basically sends him to go kill Faust. But before we get to that, he does say goodbye to Quincy because it's only manners to say goodbye to your host. And it says that we will meet again very soon. And he changes to a bat and leaves. So next night,
he does something better to Brand, though.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Because he turns Brand.
Oh no, you're right. I thought he mesmerized him. Right? No, he had turns the vampire. My apologies. You're correct. Because to be fair, the dialogue simply says, "The others are mindless swine, but you are the leader and deserve more than their fate. Now, Brand, you are mine to obey and listen to me as I have ordered." So, and the actual panel is just Dracula leaning over him and him screaming. But because Brand is screaming as opposed to just standing mindless, you're right. You have to kind of look through that and go, okay, no, he's actually been turned. So I didn't notice that the first time through. I thought he was just mesmerized. Brand goes back to Faust's place, asks if he killed Harker. And he's like, nope, Harker's alive, but I'm going to kill you. And because Faust is a villain, he's like, no, I actually have a voodoo doll of you already. So I expected this betrayal, and now I'm going to turn to you. But you're right, as you point out, Chris, he's already dead. So it doesn't work because I am a vampire. And so he drinks Faust's blood. And the needle inadvertently stabs through the doll's heart, which stakes Brand, and then the sun comes up to kill him. Implies that he's killing him. He's been waiting to die. You don't actually see the final death.
I love it though. This ending almost makes some of this issue worthwhile. The fact that Brand turns Faust, who is still in the Iron Lung, but Sun comes in even once he comes back, and then he is killed again. Like that's
Right.
villain, don't be a villain. Ending moral of the story.
Right. And so what we are left with is that uh, Dracula is not quite the Moriarty style villain or the master or whatever. It's someone who makes nothing but intricate plans and has it all happen in a move. He does get his own hands dirty. But he's not adverse to intricate Rube Goldberg style plans if it suits his purposes, which are completely arbitrary. But that's something I kind of dig about Dracula and Tomb of Dracula in the sense that, like, later versions of Dracula, they play him much more as the chess master kind of character, right? But this particular version of Dracula is the kind of guy who's like, so these bikers piss me off. I'm gonna track them down. I'm just gonna beat the shit out of a couple of them, but then I'm gonna make sure the one guy really has ironic death as much as possible. So he's Dracula has a temper, which is something that I think Doom doesn't quite have, as an example, right? There's a lot of overlap in how Doom and Dracula are written, but Doom's anger is much more cold, sublimated. I will spend an eternity hunting you down, Richards. Dracula will just fuck a guy up for the stupidest of reasons.
Well, Dooms is more controlled, and he gets it, but he does something. I'm not going to say constructive with it. He uses it to fuel his own ends, compared to Dracula, that goes on almost as like a bestial rage that overtakes him, which could go back to the more vampiric nature of Dracula and touching once again on like the more base human desires that Dracula may have and more easily exploited than what Dooms are.
Right. Right. But you'd said before that you weren't a fan of this issue. Was it just because of the middle bit where it was, let's recap previous issues, then let's recap this guy's history, then let's add more recapping on top of it? Or
I didn't like the ableism. I didn't like the racism. I think part of the thing is I encountered Dracula more when Dracula's already part of the Marvel universe. So and as someone that's a superhero fan and a blender of genres, I like Dracula being in a superhero universe because it adds an extra level of terror, because you're used to seeing superheroes able to fight most villains and easily sort of thwart them. Dracula as a mystical villain fighting, we'll say, Spider-Man is more complicated. Compared to here, where there's no one on par with Dracula. Dracula chooses not to kill people. There's no one that can stop Dracula. And part of that's because it's Dracula series, but also because of the power level difference between them.
That's fair. I don't know if it's going to be in the run that we're doing, but later on, shit gets weird, right? Like, there's more superheroic-ish stuff. At one point, he fights a brain in a jar, literally. So, I mean, it goes there at a point. I don't know. We're still kind of in the this is more ostensibly a horror comic, right? And again, that's something else to kind of think about when we're talking about the pacing of these. Is that they're meant to be kind of, here's this horrible thing that happened, and it's like, isn't it tragic if these two men who were swept up in their own vices ended up dying ironic deaths. It's Dracula is simply the vehicle for where these horror stories happen. But again, Marv is starting to turn it into something more closely resembling the plotting of, say, an X-Men style comic or another kind of Marvel comic. It's drawing more from, let's say, another contemporary, the Conan comic, than necessarily, say, some of the other superhero comics, but there is that overlap, whereas you're seeing kind of the last vestiges of it's more kind of one and done. Here's a story that happens to have Dracula in it, and maybe you'll see some characters you recognize. Because, I mean, yes, we saw pretty much the entire core supporting cast in this, but except for Quincy, they were just anecdotal. We saw we saw Drake and Van Helsing just as an excuse to explain why Quincy was alone. And even then, that could have been any other person, right? You know, there was no reason for him to have been one of the core cast, and that story would have changed not one bit.
And you
So
highlighted, but as you highlighted, Quincy's inclusion in the story is at best like you really gotta sort of squint to see why they would have that be there. Quincy doing business sort of consultation to other people is doesn't make much sense for the character.
right, exactly. This has the vibe of Marv had this script half written in his head for something completely different and reworked it into a quick, let's get this done for Dracula story.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, let's the ableism, racism, even for the 70s, isn't great. The only thing I will say in extremely mild defense is that at least the villain using voodoo was not black, you know, but in a way that's also kind of worse because it's just a white dude appropriating somebody else's culture for his own ends. So take
Yep.
that for it.
It was a lose-lose situation. And
Right,
one of
right.
the reasons I'm not harping on it is I'm taking into context when it was written and also some of the stuff that I know that Marv Wolfman will do if we're following his timeline and has done.
Right, right. Uh, you feel like I mean this is literally over 50 years ago, right? So a lot has changed. And you're right, Marv has always been trying to push for more inclusion of black characters. This was not one of the better attempts to do that.
And one of the things that we're trying to do is take it into context when it was written and how it was used. And if it had been more prominent throughout the issue, then I would have had more things to really say about it and delve into it. Here, it was 3 panels, maybe 4, to give a reason why this person is capable of doing what they're doing. And it's problematic, but it is not as atrocious as some of the things that we've read, some of the things that we will likely read in the future and come back to.
Right. Any other final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I look forward to the next issue because I haven't read it yet. And so right now I'm 50-50 on the series.
So there we go. One good, one bad issue. We'll see how things go. Actually, before we talk about next issue, Night of the Screaming House. Where can people find you online if they want to support you?
You can go to Blue Sky. I'm at Darker Hue. Or if you want to buy one of my remaining copies of Haunted West, because we had a great big sale recently, you can do that from the darkerstudios.com website. What about you?
You can find me at pugsteady.com, but if you want to buy stuff that gets me money directly, the best way to do that is through my Pugmire game, which is realmsofpugmire.com. You can also find us on the Darker Hue Discord, where I am happy to certainly talk about Tomb of Dracula or any of the 70s Marvel comics. I think we'd both be happy to talk about 70s Marvel comics.
And if you have another run that you'd like us to do,
Yeah,
come to the Discord. Let us know.
yeah, absolutely. But until then, we will see you next time with issue 12.